Hi, I'm Chrissy Benson. I am an author, podcaster, lawyer, and I'm currently in grad school for clinical mental health counseling. I went vegan in 2011, and as for why, I'd been vegetarian for a long time, but I was a very, very ignorant vegetarian. I thought if it were a choice between starving to death and eating an animal, I'd probably eat the animal, but in this day and age, how can I justify making that choice? And so I was committed vegetarian, but I knew nothing really about factory farming or the food system, and particularly nothing about the egg and dairy industry. And just gradually over time, more information started seeping in about, first it was about the egg industry and a little bit about the dairy industry too. And I just grew increasingly uncomfortable continuing to consume those products. But I had been a very non-vegan vegetarian. I ate lots of dairy, lots of healthy dairy, non-fat Greek yogurt, egg whites. I didn't eat cheese because I'd ruled that out long ago for health reasons. But as I learned more about what was happening to the egg-laying hens, I just, knew it wasn't right, knew it was never going to sit well with me. And that I knew myself. I knew, other people may be able to live with that niggling feeling at their conscience, but I know how I'm wired. I just can't do that. So I went vegan very reluctantly. I literally remember thinking, I'm going to have to do it eventually, so I may as well just do it now. And I did it, and it felt hard. It felt really hard at first for about 3 weeks, I'd say. It was pretty touch and go, and I thought, how am I going to do this? I even remember emailing my brother and saying, I gave this a shot, like I fought the good fight, but it's just too tough. I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep it up. And then about 3 weeks in, I was living in New York City at the time, and a bunch of things kind of coalesced, like the movie Vegucated premiered in New York City, and I also happened to start listening to this online vegan summit called Vegan Palooza, and I was at a job where I was just sitting at a computer all day long and could listen to this information. So I just listened to all this information, and the more I learned, the more it just affirmed this decision. And as I like to say, I became radicalized via the internet regarding veganism, because once I started really understanding what was happening to these animals, I just knew that how could I possibly participate? So that's where it all began.
Wow. So how far back does your vegetarianism go?
It's hard to say. I can't pinpoint it exactly. I had been vegetarian for at least a year or so, shortly after college, on and off. I also had an issue, long-standing issue with compulsive overeating and binge eating. So that was its own journey. Even joined a 12-step program to work with that issue. And then somewhere along the line, I really just phased out meat. Again, just thinking like, sure, if it were a choice between starving to death and eating the animal, maybe I'd eat the animal. But, how can I do that when I am not forced into that position? So it was probably a good maybe 10 years prior to going vegan that I'd been vegetarian.
As far as why you went vegetarian, it sounds like you were doing this for ethical reasons.
Correct, yeah.
So it's almost like you were vegan forward.
Vegan forward?
Yeah, it's kind of a term I learned a few years ago when I was in Michigan interviewing somebody. And it just means like you're moving in that direction. You have that ethics. You're just trying to figure things out.
Yeah. I've never heard that term before, but that would be accurate, because it was purely for ethical reasons. And it's funny because thinking back, before I went vegan, I had a coworker for a year or two who was a vegan before I was vegan. And I remember at the time, like thinking back in hindsight, I would have been very interested in some of the information that she might have shared with me about why she went vegan, but she was not a vegan advocate. It was almost like being vegan made her feel special, and so she almost kind of wanted to keep it to herself and be the only vegan. So I remember, it's kind of funny thinking back. I'm like, if only she told me some of this stuff. Like I was kind of hungry for it, hungry for the information. But I eventually came to it on my own. And it was fascinating too, because I had always had what I considered a separate interest in health and nutrition. And it wasn't until after I went vegan that I started learning about plant-based nutrition and the China study and the fact that eating a whole food plant-based diet can prevent and often even reverse many of our chronic Western diseases, that I realized, oh my gosh, like my ethical concerns and my health interests completely align. And I also discovered the information about the impact on the environment and just resource availability and starving children in Africa. And it was really profound for me. It was almost like a spiritual awakening at the time, because I realized, wow, the most loving thing that I can do for the animals is also the most loving thing I can do for my own body and for starving children across the world and for the planet. And for me, it really just crystallized love almost as a principle of physics. Like this is love in action. And thinking about the nutritional aspect, in retrospect, I remember just thinking, how could these products of torture and suffering possibly be healthy for my body? It's obvious, in hindsight.
Prior to being vegan forward, were there things in your life that happened that maybe set the seed for you to eventually be curious and move in this direction?
I've wondered about that too. Like, what is it that makes certain people care and certain people start asking questions and ultimately go vegan, and other people just never do? I don't have an answer to that. But I do remember some moments in childhood where I noticed what was happening to animals and just didn't like it. For instance, my dad used to take us fishing. And we would go fishing, and I remember several times, accidentally knocking the fish out of the bucket that we were, keeping them in after we'd caught them to, let them go back into the lake. So I remember things like that. I always loved animals. I think most kids loved animals. We had a dog. I loved her. But I don't really know what it was that prompted me first to start thinking about it. It seems kind of obvious. Again, yes, if it's a choice between starving to death and eating an animal, then, there's an argument to be made for eating the animal. But in our modern day life, where we have all these options, it just didn't make any sense. And again, I guess I would say in terms of personality, pretty conscientious. So it's tough for me to do things that don't agree with my conscience. Integrity is, important to me. I know it's important to a lot of people, but I think it varies. I think other people maybe are better at cognitive dissonance and just living with it. And I'm just not wired that way. Like I can't really live with it. So it's hard for me to continue in a practice that I know is wrong, even if it's inconvenient. Again, integrity and acting in accordance with my values. And again, it's very funny, because even as I'm hearing myself speak, I feel like I'm sounding very self-righteous and preachy. But really, I don't think that being vegan is really anything even to be proud of, because to me it seems pretty obvious. Like, why would you hurt animals unnecessarily? Like, that's something that you shouldn't do, but like, it should be like a base. It should be like a baseline. Like, that's a pretty low moral bar, So yes, I'm glad I can look myself in the mirror and, feel good that I'm abstaining from participating in our sociopathic food system. But am I proud of it? Is this something to brag about? Again, no. I think that's pretty basic.
In a previous interview here, the person was proud, and I think the reason why they were proud was because, essentially you have to be a leader to do this, because if you're not, you're going to follow what everybody else is doing. And so you're making a very conscious decision to be different. That takes some strength. Do you feel like that, maybe? Yeah, I could definitely feel that way, for sure. I mean, you have to be willing to buck convention, and you have to be willing to be different and to be a bit of an outlier. And that's why I started my podcast, The Vegan Posse, which is all about community among vegans. And and I think maybe part of what just shaped me into ultimately becoming a vegan was just
that I had my own insecurities. I often felt voiceless or just, like I couldn't really stand up for myself. So I had that additional level of empathy for, non-human animals who were just oppressed victims that nobody was standing up for them. So there was that, and then maybe the fact that I often, didn't really feel like I fit in general with mainstream society. So that made it a little bit easier to, add vegan to the list of things that made me different about, me from other people. But, it wasn't, more than anything though, honestly, I feel lucky to have found the vegan path. I wouldn't call it pride, but I do feel integrity, and I feel good that I'm vegan. But more than anything, I feel so lucky to have found this path, and just for whatever reason, to have asked enough questions and done enough research to discover just what I really think is the best way of living. And I'm more than anything, I'm grateful to have found it. Yes, it's inconvenient. Yes, it can make you feel isolated and different, and it can be tough for sure. But again, I just, more than anything, I feel so lucky.
Fast forward to going vegan. What kind of physiological, mental, or emotional changes did you experience after going vegan?
Yeah, so I was a pretty healthy non-vegan. I've been a daily runner for a long, long time, and I always ate lots of vegetables. I did eat lots of dairy, but again, the healthy dairy, the non-fat dairy. So I was in pretty good condition. I had gotten my eating disorder, for the most part, sorted out thanks to the help of 12-step programs and all of that good stuff. But I did go to the doctor at one point, and they told me that my cholesterol was over 200. And that was surprising because, again,
pre-vegan?
Pre-vegan, yeah. And I was, again, a daily runner, ate lots of vegetables, lots of whole grains, like, pretty top-notch diet, albeit one that included animal products. And so that took me aback. And then my doctor looked closer at the numbers, and she said, oh, most of that is HDL, the good cholesterol. So actually you're fine. And I thought, okay, okay. But after I went vegan, at one point I had some blood work done, and my cholesterol was 120.
Well, that's about what mine ended up being, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah.
It went from like 168 to 121.
Oh, wow. That was a change. I also noticed just improvements in, the female stuff like PMS and, those sorts of things. But for the most part, I had felt pretty good as a non-vegan, so I can't claim that there was a dramatic shift in my health and well-being. But it really just was such a mental comfort, just knowing what to eat, and just knowing that, okay, if I'm eating whole plant foods, it's going to be pretty much impossible for me to consume more food than my body needs. And so, the portion control and restriction, that was not even in my world anymore. And so that was great. I remember one New Year's Eve chatting with a coworker and saying, like, oh, do you have any New Year's resolutions? And she was just like, oh, the usual, get in shape, lose weight. And I just remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful. I'm not there anymore. Like, that's one thing that's off my list of things to do,
What are your favorite foods?
I love popcorn. I eat a lot of popcorn.
Yeah.
So I have two sort of recipes for popcorn, and it's going to sound pretty weird. But one recipe, I like kind of a savory version, which is I put the kernels in like a glass popcorn popper, and I put some liquid aminos, some nutritional yeast, and some chili powder. Cool. And then pop that, and it's delicious. Nice. And then sometimes I like to do kind of what I consider sort of a kettle corn. And so in a paper bag, just a brown paper lunch bag, I put popcorn kernels and some salt, some cinnamon, and like a stevia packet. And it just seasons the popcorn really, really nicely. Cool. So, yeah. So I've come up with all kinds of crazy concoctions, you know.
Nice.
So my popcorn, yeah, I love popcorn. And then I'm a huge fan of the Instant Pot and soups, you know. So I just love batch cooking and making a bunch of I like warm foods in a bowl. You know, that's.
What kind of stuff do you do? I like doing split pea soup, sweet potatoes, all kinds of things in there. What do you do?
I love red lentils, cauliflower, red lentils, onions, mushrooms, red cabbage is another one of my favorite foods. I actually eat a lot of raw red cabbage. I probably possibly eat more red cabbage than anyone on the planet because I like to chop it up and just kind of eat it like raw, but just like with my hands, like almost like chips. The people at my old workplace used to, you know, kind of make fun of my cabbage chips, but they weren't fried or even cooked or anything. They were just raw. But I just love raw red cabbage, and according to Michael Greger, it's one of the healthiest foods on the planet. So,
and one of the least expensive.
Yeah, it's really a great.
And it lasts forever.
It lasts forever.
Or long enough for you to eat it.
No, I love it. Yeah. And the Instant Pot and soups, and then I'm trying to think what else.
So a lot of the things you named, you don't really need to be in the Instant Pot, though, right?
Basically, for lunch and or dinner, I'll eat whatever I cooked in the Instant Pot that week. So
what kind of things might you do in the Instant Pot?
So I'll do, you know, like a stew or a soup, usually with red lentils, cauliflower, mushrooms, onions, some red cabbage, possibly some Brussels sprouts, and some chopped up sweet potatoes or regular potatoes.
You put all that in the Instant Pot? How long? Well,
the Instant Pot has different settings, so I'll just put it on the soup setting, which is like 20 or 30 minutes. I mean, there are several options that you can do. You can press the chili setting if you want, which I think is maybe 30 minutes. I think there's another soup option that's 20 minutes, so I don't think it matters that much. But
well, I always just put a certain amount of time on mine.
Oh, you do? You don't use the pre-settings? Okay, yeah, I usually use the pre-settings, so yeah.
And lentils are kind of easy to cook just on the stovetop.
Yeah, but the Instant Pot, I just love it because I love the texture of the foods when you cook them in the Instant Pot, and I love the red lentils. They basically dissolve, and it becomes like this just sort of creamy, really thick soup. So I love regular lentils, but now I almost always go for the red lentils, which don't stay red. They turn into more of a yellowish thing. And so I usually season my Instant Pot stew with lots of curry seasonings, you know, like lots of cumin and red curry and some clove powder, just everything you can think of. Garlic, always lots of garlic.
Nice.
Yeah, so.
Good stuff.
Yep.
You ever try the black lentils?
I think I've had those. Yeah, I think I had those at my brother's house last Thanksgiving. Yeah.
They're a little bit smaller.
Yeah, and they're like harder. They're like more.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And I think they might even have not that it matters. They might be a little more nutritious, maybe. I don't know.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, I think like the smaller the husk is or the shell is, then the more surface area you're going to consume.
Interesting.
Which is more exposure to the sun and more reaction to that and creating more like, you know, phytonutrients.
No, that's great to know. Yeah, I love discovering those new foods or new tweaks. Even though I know I'm already eating very well, there's always room to grow and learn new things.
But I mean, I imagine red. Doesn't matter, green, lentils, whatever, they're all top shelf foods.
I also love the purple sweet potatoes and the Japanese yams. So there are ones that are purple inside are great, and then the ones that are not purple inside but purple outside but still kind of sweet, they're delicious too. So I love
the Japanese sweet potatoes, you mean?
Yeah.
Those are excellent. Those are some of my favorites too. What about grains?
Well, popcorn, honestly, is my favorite grain. Yeah, so popcorn. And then usually I'll do farro or quinoa in the Instant Pot as well. Nice. So yeah.
Cool. So we hit grains, beans. What about greens? Like romaine or arugula or whatever, spinach or...
I'm kind of lazy when it comes to making salads, so I don't make a lot of salads, to be honest.
Yeah.
But what I do is I love to buy the frozen kale and just stir fry it with like artichoke hearts and onions and mushrooms and maybe chickpeas or maybe some boca veggie crumbles or something, and then season it with like chili seasonings, like more of a Mexican kind of style. And then after it's cooked, I'll add some salsa. I love adding mustard to everything too. That's my other standard dinner.
Cool. And then after you open the Instant Pot with those red lentils, you could probably throw some fresh kale in there.
And sometimes I do that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Nice. So that's the legumes, greens, grains, and then fruits. What about those?
Yeah, I eat a fair amount of berries. I love watermelon. In the summertime, I can't get enough watermelon. So lots of berries, watermelon, apples. Yeah, my fruit consumption isn't super high. I've always gravitated a little more toward vegetables than toward fruits, but and yeah.
Legumes, greens, grains, fruits, veggies, and we already covered that. Like you.
Oh, and then in addition to what's in the Instant Pot, because the Instant Pot concoction usually has pretty much everything you named, like the greens, the grains, the everything. But I also love broccoli, so I basically steam. I chop my broccoli in advance, which I don't know if you've heard about this, but it preserves this big cancer-fighting enzyme. So I always cut it in advance, and it wasn't until after the fact that I learned about that benefit. So that was awesome. Cool. But so I always steam like a big pot of broccoli, and I basically eat like a plate of broccoli as my appetizer. I love broccoli.
Mushrooms?
Yeah. They're in everything. Yeah, they're in the Instant Pot. Nice. They're in the stir fry.
And nuts and seeds?
I eat flaxseed every day. I've started eating a tablespoon of wheat germ. I don't know if you read from...
Yeah, spermidine.
Yeah, exactly. So that was one of my main takeaway from Dr. Michael Greger's latest book, How Not to Age, that for some reason. I'll eat nuts occasionally, usually like once a month I'll have some Brazil nuts, some walnuts. They're not like a daily thing for me, but I'll occasionally eat them.
So what about friends and family? Have you been able to influence anybody in this direction?
Yeah, yes and no. My brother is a vegan. I don't take credit for that, but it's definitely fabulous having a vegan sibling. And then my parents are headed in that direction. I was sharing with some people earlier that my dad, at my urging, he read Dr. Joel Fuhrman's book, Eat to Live, and then he also is very interested in the economic system because he's a retired banker and he has lots of opinions about government spending. So I gave him a book called Meatonomics, which talks about the economics of our food system and the subsidies that go to the meat and dairy sector, and how they control the prices and make the prices of those products artificially low. So he read those two books, and he said to me afterwards, he said, I don't know how anyone could read those two books and ever look at food the same way again. And they live in Florida, where there are lots of elderly people around, and they see everybody around them falling apart. And so my dad's pretty determined, not to become part of the falling apart crowd. So for that reason, they have made some good changes. Honestly, when I talk to them, they make it sound like they're almost totally vegan. Then when I spend time with them, I get a different impression. But they at least have recognized, the advantages, and I really hope that they start to incorporate that more into their lives now that they're getting older.
A lot of this is health oriented. Do you ever throw that at them?
They don't care about the ethics. I would say I don't think my dad has a strong affinity for animals, so that doesn't really grab him or move him too much. And then my mom's father, my grandfather, had a chicken farm. And so my mom's Ukrainian, my grandparents emigrated here with my mom from Ukraine. And then they ended up, having to rebuild their lives here in the U.S. And my grandfather ended up buying a farm in southern New Jersey. And like I said, it was a chicken farm. He also had a garden and lots of amazing produce, but primarily it was a chicken farm. And I think he also had ducks at a certain point. So my mom is very defensive about the animal piece of things because I think in her view it would mean dishonoring everything that he did, for her and for us. And, she doesn't want to say that his whole way of life was based on something morally repugnant.
Yeah, but if you frame it in the context of time and understanding, maybe you could say, well, it's just outdated.
Oh yeah, I've tried. Believe me, Jeff, I've tried. Yeah, I've tried every angle I can think of. Yeah, and they know how I feel. And in fact, my mom she was going to come to Vegan Summerfest with me a few years ago. In 2020, we had tickets to come to Vegan Summerfest, and then, as you know, it didn't happen in 2020, and we postponed our tickets to the following year, and it was canceled again. And then by the following year, she had lost patience and wanted her money back. So I was really excited to sharing that experience with her and just exposing her to this wonderful information and the ethical aspect and the health aspect and the community, and also just something that means so much to me, and sharing that experience with her. But maybe it will happen. Yeah.
That's an interesting thing, because I think earlier we were talking about your experience as a child maybe having an influence on you potentially being able to be receptive to this later in life. But somebody who's older, they've experienced so much, I guess you could say, love with offerings of animals, and so it's become ingrained in their way of expressing love, or in this case, supporting a family, right? That's a lot to overcome. Sharing that helps other people understand where some people might be coming from, and ideally we'd meet people where they're at, right? So talk about your podcast a little bit. Does it do any of that? Does it help normalize veganism in any way, or what does it do exactly? What is your podcast about?
Yeah, so the podcast, again, the name is Vegan Posse. And I love the word posse because community is so important. And I live in Nashville, Tennessee, so what better place for a posse? And then digging deeper into the definition of the word, I learned that typically a posse is a group of people organized for peacekeeping purposes. So they're law enforcement, they're there to keep the peace. And I thought, what better term for a group of vegans, because we're not just keeping the peace, we're creating it through our food choices and beyond. Yes, the aims are exactly what you described, to normalize veganism, and also just to help vegans recognize that even though it can feel isolating and it can feel lonely, feeling like you're the only one who cares about these issues and is making choices based on these values, just to help them see that no, you're not alone. In fact, there are a whole posse of individuals around the world, living lives of integrity and compassion, and with an eye toward justice, and not just keeping the peace, but creating it through their food choices. So yes, the podcast does seek to normalize veganism, and more than anything, just provide community and camaraderie and support for vegans,
Yeah, because if we're kind of bucking that system of how we traditionally expressed love through feeding each other and surrounding events around these meals that we look at differently now, we definitely need that community. And
right.
And so that's awesome that you're doing that. What kind of people have you had on your show?
Oh, I've had such amazing people. So I've had Dr. Jen Hawk, Dr. Doug Lyle, Dr. Joel Kahn, Dr. Will Tuttle. Everyone I've named happens to be a doctor, whether medical or a PhD, but I've also had some, lots of amazing non-medical people. Like I had a woman named Nurma who is from Bosnia, and she's a genocide survivor. And so she shared her story and about how she, saw what happened to her in, surviving this horrific, war. And then when she came to the U.S. and learned about what was happening to animals, and just realizing, oh my goodness, like what's happening to them is what almost happened to me, and how can I stand by? So I've had some really interesting people on. I have so many people. I can't list all the great people.
Yeah, you don't want to miss somebody.
I don't want to miss somebody, exactly.
But the one you just mentioned, though, from Bosnia, I've noticed that there's so many different walks of life. You've got like Wayne Chung, who's from China. You've got, I interviewed this lady named Lizelle Appel. her birth was a gift to Nazi Germany, to Hitler. And then you have all these Jewish people in the movement. You know, so you have all these different polarized backgrounds, all with the same underlying purpose coming together. And it's such a beautiful thing, and that it unites us all, right?
Yeah.
And I guess, so you're probably experiencing this on your podcast as well, I suppose.
Definitely. And in fact, most recently, like the past month, for the month of May, it's doing what I call the Tennessee series. So it's featuring vegans in my local area outside of Nashville, Tennessee, because I realized I'm talking to people from around the globe. You know, I've talked to people from South Africa and, you know, Germany and, you know, just so many amazing places. But there are lots of great vegans in my own backyard who are really, really just out there pushing awareness and increasing consciousness around these issues, you know. So that's been really cool, just to connect more with some of the people in my area. One of the interviews that's going to be coming out soon is with Dr. Scott Stoll, who founded something called the Plantrition Project. And, you know, he's just such a lovely, lovely guy.
He's not in Nashville, though, is he?
He is, yeah.
How long has he been in Nashville?
Just a couple of years, not long.
Okay.
Yeah.
'Cause I think he was in Jersey for a while.
He was in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I think he was working with Joel Furman at his clinic in Jersey, and I have a lot of history with Nashville as well, coming from a musical background.
Right.
So I've frequented, you know, Broadway and that area and all Music Row and all that.
Yeah.
And it's like last time I was there, I was passing through, coming back from Kansas, where we're at now. And I couldn't find anything vegan.
Well, in Nashville, there are lots of great vegan places, actually, which was a pleasant surprise to me. In fact, I moved to Nashville from New York in 2017, and I drove here with my vegan brother. He stayed the night, and then we were looking for a place to go to brunch that Sunday morning. And we were thinking, what are the chances of finding a vegan brunch in Nashville, Tennessee? You know, but we're like, just for the heck, we didn't think of Happy Cow at the time, but we just Googled vegan brunch, and lo and behold, there was a vegan restaurant less than half a mile from where I live in Nashville, and it's amazing. It's a place called Graze, Graze.
Cool.
And it's fantastic. I love breakfast foods, so I love vegan pancakes and potatoes and the tofu scrambles and all the breakfasty type stuff. So that was just a great sign. That felt like such a positive omen, you know, that I live within walking distance of a vegan restaurant. And there are a number of places. So there are any number of amazing vegan places in Nashville. And in fact, one of the most recent vegan spots in downtown Nashville is the Nashville Public Library, which is this beautiful historic building. And it has a cafe and restaurant attached to it. And recently, within the past several years, a vegan restaurant moved in. So now the restaurant officially associated with the Nashville Public Library is a vegan restaurant.
I used to park there when I would go to Broadway. You park there and you walk down.
You can park there, yeah.
So they have a vegan restaurant there. Wow.
Yeah, it's called Copper Branch. Yeah, it's great. And I just love the fact that, you know, it's officially connected with a Nashville institution. Wow. I think that's a great sign, yeah. And then there are vegan ice cream places. There's a vegan biscuit shop. There's a vegan deli called the Beehive, where you can get, you know, vegan pepperoni and vegan, you know, junk foods kind of sub-style sandwiches, but like amazing. And they produce a lot of vegan meats for a lot of the local restaurants. There's a Mellow Mushroom restaurant that has all kinds of vegan options. So lots of really good options.
Probably expensive though.
Yeah, I mean, everything's expensive. Everything's expensive. Yeah.
I guess the last time I was there, I didn't look too hard. I was just looking en route, and I was coming from my friend's house. So.
Yeah.
But now that you mention it, sounds like there's quite a few options.
There are quite a few.
Yeah. I never plug my site. But if you wanted to join my site, you could put your podcast on there.
Okay.
You could totally list it. And then if you also wanted to, you could even reach out to these restaurants, or you could just add them to the site as well. And then your profile will appear as the author of these listings. And then they could all be linked together. And then that puts Nashville on the map for vegan stuff. As far as Happy Cow is concerned, it's also really cool to Google stuff, because then it helps index those websites in the Google algorithm. Is there anybody we're leaving out as far as like vegan restaurants are concerned?
I would say Gray's is definitely I love Gray's for their breakfast food and their pancakes. There's also a place that I love called Sunflower Cafe. They're probably my favorite food overall. And they recently opened up a bakery called Sunflower Bakehouse that's all vegan and gluten-free as well. So that's a great place to go if I need vegan cupcakes for an event or something like that.
Cool.
There's a place called Avo that's a little trendier and high-end.
You know what you should do? Start a little like Nashville vegan tour.
There you go. There you go.
There's a couple of young ladies I interviewed in St. Augustine, and they veganize as many of the places they can so they could do these tours. And that's the incentive. Hey, you add a vegan option and we'll bring people to your place.
That's awesome. I have a friend named Carla Sokol in Columbus, Ohio, who has a group that does the same thing. But my parents live in St. Augustine.
Oh, cool. We can find that podcast by just Googling Vegan Posse?
Yeah, it's broadcast through Spotify, and it's also on YouTube. You can look up Vegan Posse, and then it's available on all the regular podcast platforms like Apple and Podbean, and
What kind of lawyer are you?
I've done lots of different things. So basically, I'm an attorney who's running from the law, basically.
Running from the law, what does that mean?
Well, it just means that I never really wanted to be a lawyer. So now I'm on a path to become a licensed professional counselor, so to become a therapist.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and then I'm of course a writer as well, so that's my other.
Does any of that relate to veganism at all?
Yes, I would say so. Well, my novel that came out in November 22 features a vegan protagonist. So it's women's fiction. It's called Marrying Myself. It's available on Amazon, or you can visit my website, ChristineMelanieBenson.com, and find out all the info. But that was really important to me to have a vegan protagonist and a really fun story that would appeal to both vegans and non-vegans and really help normalize veganism through the arts, because I really think it's important just for people to be hearing the word vegan, seeing vegans in movies, in films, in books, and just recognizing, oh, right, they're everywhere. They're not just, and they're out there doing things. They're not just, sitting in a room at home alone all day watching animal rights videos. They're out in the world doing cool things. And so, that was a big motivator in writing my novel, was just, contributing to the growing literature featuring vegan characters.
And you have an audio version, right?
There is an audio version, yes.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Could you be with somebody who isn't vegan?
It would, that's a constant dilemma that I encounter with a lot of my guests on the podcast. I've had a number of women say that they're pretty certain that they wouldn't still be single if they weren't vegan, or if they were willing to be with a non-vegan partner. For me, the short answer is no. The longer answer is, as long as someone's open to learning health, is curious and compassionate and willing to vegan friendly. That's the initial baseline. But long term, that would be, it definitely would not be ideal. And I have friends who've been through that. Like I have a good friend in New York City who had been married for a long time when she went vegan. And when she went vegan, he just had no interest in learning anything about it, even though he had all the typical issues, high blood pressure, diabetes, you name it. He was, also alcohol in the mix. And it was a big strain on their marriage, because a lot of the things they used to do, the wine and cheese, the foodie stuff, where now she was a picky eater, and it really was a strain on their marriage, and they did end up, he ended up dying, in fact, but they were already divorced or planning to divorce at that point. So I don't know how women do it, I mean, I guess I do know how, because we women put up with a lot in many cases that we really shouldn't. And that's what my novel focuses on in part. That's not the plot of the story, but as you may be able to glean from the title, Marrying Myself, it's all about just checking in with yourself and honoring that inner voice, and really just loving yourself and just acting in love and not settling for less than you really feel good about, which can be tough to do, because we all want that companionship and we want that partnership, and it's so important. And at the same time, it can't come at the expense of loving ourselves and treating ourselves in the best way possible. So it's a fine line, because, on the one hand, there's this term settling in a relationship, like, oh, everyone says you shouldn't settle. Well, the reality is everybody settles to some extent, because, we're not out here, holding out for, Brad Pitt, or I don't know who the appropriate male, sex symbol is to insert there, because I kind of live under a rock when it comes to pop culture. But yeah, we all settle in terms of, like, we work with what we've got and the available options. But that said, we women tend to, we just tend to be a little more prone to codependency and people pleasing, and just not wanting to hurt other people, set limits. Yeah. So it's tricky. So I don't think any ethical vegan, especially, or even a health-focused vegan, would want to be with someone who's not vegan. But it's tough, because so few people, especially men, of the vegans who actually exist currently, there aren't many of those, and then the large majority are women. So if we women rule out non-vegan men from the get-go, then there's kind of no one in the pool. So a lot of us rely on conversion, or somehow finding a way to live with that duality. And
well, I've had a couple of my male friends say that they would probably be more inclined to go this way if their wives would do it right and do it, just do it,
Well, the men can do some of the cooking too.
Yeah.
But
in these cases, the men were doing most of the work, like going outside of the house.
I see. Yeah. Well, with my parents, for instance, my dad has even said, and I don't know if this is true, but he said, like, I would eat vegan if mom cooked vegan.
Yeah, if that was all she could.
Yeah.
As far as, like, the lawyer stuff, are you able to represent an activist? Are you that kind of lawyer?
I wouldn't say. I mean, right now I'm not practicing, and I live in Tennessee. I'm licensed to practice in Florida and Oklahoma. So that would be, I could certainly give advice, and I could certainly, give some guidance and help draft legal pleadings and that sort of thing.
But as far as, like, the counseling, then, is any of that are you going to try to tailor any of that toward, like, dystopia?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to have to see how that goes, because I would really, of course, love to, help people with dystopia. In fact, Dr. Claire Mann, who coined that term, she was on my podcast.
Nice.
Yeah.
She's so sweet.
She's so sweet. Yeah. She's pretty cool. So I would definitely like to help vegans. And in fact, I've had a coaching practice for quite some time. And so I do counsel mostly vegans, in that realm. And then
there is a category on my website for that.
Oh, good. Okay, perfect. And in fact, I know that during the times of my life when I've sought out counseling, especially at various points, it was important to me to find a vegan counselor. So and in terms, but that said, as a counselor, you of course have to meet people where they're at and not impose your values on them. And also as a counselor, it's important not to bring too much of yourself into the room, because it's really about the client.
Countertransference.
Yeah, all the lingo. Yeah, so I'm going to have to see how it goes. I just started my internship for my counseling program, and I'll be completing my internship next year. and then we'll be, out counseling on a professional level beginning next year. And so as far as the vegan aspect, it'll be interesting to see how it goes, because I definitely do take a holistic approach just to life and to well-being in general. And, obviously our minds are in our bodies. And so this artificial separation that you often see in the counseling realm, well, okay, we're going to work on your mental health, and then your physical health is something completely separate. Well, they're very intertwined, in my opinion. And often the best thing that people can do to help with their depression, even with their anxiety, or just overall, just issues that they're struggling with, often exercise, a better diet, improving the, bacterium in their microbiome, all of that stuff can have much more of an issue than, weeks or years of talk therapy. So as to how much I'll be able to integrate the holistic, approach into my practice, like I'm going to have to see how it goes. But yeah.
Well, I was a mental health counselor for 15 years. I had to get away from it. It was kind of toxic.
To your mental health, yes.
And it wasn't even the clients. It was just, the bureaucracy and everything. But, and not having that holistic approach. And I'm really hoping one day to see more of that happen. Adam Sudd, have you heard of him?
No.
You would love his story. It's like one of the most powerful stories I've ever heard. In fact, when I heard it at Plant Stock with the Esselstyn's hold, I was bawling, I couldn't stop. It was just so powerful. I mean, he's a recovering addict and all. He's trying to work with the mental health system, and I think maybe integrate this, but I haven't followed up. When I was in mental health, I felt like it was a disservice to the clients to not have that a part of the treatment plan, because if they're in there feeling sick and all, they're just going to be having a hard time focusing on their goals.
Exactly.
And I feel like the healthier you can get them, the further you can remove them from those target behaviors, So, so maybe you can find a way to take it to another level like that. That would be sweet. Do you have any kind of quotes you want to share?
Quotes? Well, one quote that really struck me when I read it, it wasn't even about veganism or animal rights, but I just felt like it summed up the animal rights movement in general. It's by a philosopher named Albert Camus, and the quote is, "Our task is impossible, so let us begin." And I just love that, because we've got so much against us in the sense that convention and industry is so entrenched in this carnistic approach to our food system and our economy, and people just don't want to change, and people don't want to think about the massive amount of suffering that's happening in this parallel universe of animal ag. And so there are a lot of things. Everything in society is pushing against us being healthy and against us being ethical and kind. So to accomplish those things, it's totally doable, and that's what I love about it. It's completely accessible on an individual basis, but on a societal level, I really feel like it's almost like in the gambling world, the house always wins. Yes, individual players can come out ahead, but ultimately the house always wins. So I feel like on an individual basis, people can get healthy, and it's not that hard once you get some solid information and get in groove, develop some healthy habits and routines. Overall, society is unfortunately channeling people in the wrong direction. And so to be happy and healthy and just kind requires swimming upstream. So for all those reasons, yes, in some ways it is an impossible task, but let us begin.
Nice. You said you had an eating disorder, right? When was the last time you've had issues with that?
Well, my disorder was binge eating. I wasn't anorexic, bulimic. I wasn't throwing up. I didn't have one of the more, what I always considered the more glamorous eating disorders, even though I know they're all debilitating and none of them are pleasant. But mine was just straight up massive binge eating. And thankfully, it's been a long time since that's been an issue.
Was it pre-vegan the last time you had an issue?
Yes, I would say so.
Do you find that it's easy to not have that issue as a vegan? in this
It's
current state?
much easier because, again, I found that if I stick to whole plant foods, if I eat whole plant foods without the added oil and sugar, then even if I eat to the point of being uncomfortably full, I don't feel sick the next day. I don't have that horrible food hangover like I used to have. Another issue for me was that I was actually having epileptic seizures associated with my binge eating.
Wow.
Yeah.
It triggered it?
Yeah, it wasn't a one-to-one correlation, so it wasn't like I would binge and then have a seizure, but bigger picture, I realized, I was having these seizures that had started happening kind of out of the blue. It was never an issue for me growing up, and I didn't have a brain tumor, my EEG was fine, all that stuff. So it was me that put that together. The neurologist just wanted to keep prescribing me pills, and so it was me who finally realized, oh, when I don't do these crazy things with food and consume these massive quantities of junk, I don't have seizures. And so that's when I realized, like, okay, I need to get a handle on this food thing, because it's not just about weight gain, although I had gained weight. It's, for me, I was like, I could live with being fat. It would suck, but I could learn to live with that. But I can't live with these seizures. So that was what prompted me to seek help and go into a 12-step program, and just it wasn't easy, and it wasn't completely a straightforward route, but eventually did get there. And then and I had not learned about veganism or a whole food plant-based diet at that point. I think if I had that information, it could have saved me a lot of time and a lot of heartache, and most likely a lot of seizures. I'm grateful that, again, that was a real lesson in trusting my own judgment, trusting my own experience, listening to what the doctors had to say, but continuing to think for myself and just keep my eye on my own prize. I knew that the doctors, what they had in mind for me was a lifetime of medication and hopefully a reduced number of seizures. And I knew, no, that's not what I want. I want to be seizure-free and medication-free, and to be healthy and to have like a full, complete life. And they weren't going to offer that to me. And so I knew I had to get a handle on my food issues to do that. And then I realized, maybe once I get a handle on this food stuff, maybe then, and the seizures stop, maybe then they'll believe me that they were related. They had been continuing to assure me, oh, the food has nothing to do with the seizures.
Well, it's interesting because, they use ketosis to treat seizures.
Yeah, but that's usually for
I know,
kids.
but
That's for kids who grew up with it.
But it just seems interesting, like if you're binge eating, like if you think there's a relation there, maybe I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, well, I'm pretty sure that it had to do with the massive blood sugar fluctuations, because you intake this massive, Yeah.
I'm curious, have you heard of intuitive eating?
I've heard of it, yeah.
It's a fascinating thing. I really love it because I was like, intermittent fasting, all these things. I was kind of getting neurotic, and I don't really feel like it was helping me. And then when I learned about intuitive eating and listened to the book on it, I really love it. It's a fantastic book.
Okay.
And then when I started interviewing a lot of athletes last year, there was quite a few that had eating disorders at some points, and several of them were familiar with intuitive eating, and it helped them solve those problems.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I haven't read the book. I personally found that, again, just sticking to whole plant foods, that did more for getting my eating normalized than all of the stuff. Because when I was in the 12-step program, there was a big emphasis on emotional eating and, using food for emotional reasons, and probably things similar. Again, I haven't read the book, but similar to some of the concepts in intuitive eating. And it's not like I didn't learn anything from all of that. It didn't solve my problem. And then once I realized that, it's these calorie-dense foods, and when I stick to the whole plant foods, it doesn't damage my body. Even if I eat to the point of being really full, even if I binge on, potatoes or something, it's just not going to do the same damage to my body that the other stuff did. So I found, for me, again, I really feel like there there is so much to be learned from those practices. Just mindful eating and, like just being present. And I do have a background in Buddhism, and I practice all meditation and mindfulness. So I do think there's a lot of great awareness that you can glean from those practices. So I do think they're beneficial. But just for me, the binge eating, that was solved by just figuring out, okay, not how I was going to eat or how much I was going to eat, but what I was going to eat. And if I stuck to the whole plant foods, I really couldn't go wrong. So
yeah, it sounds pretty intuitive.
Yeah.
It also make me think of hara hachibu, like in the blue zone, thing. That means eat till you're 80% full. I haven't figured that out. But on that note, I am getting pretty hungry, and I think they're cooking up there. So I guess we probably should call it a wrap. Is there anything that we didn't hit that you think would be cool to get out there?
No, that was great. I think we packed it all in. Nice. Yeah, people can check out my novel, Marrying Myself. I really would like to, again, normalize veganism through the arts and just, inject some veganism into the world of mainstream women's fiction. Nice. So that's the aim. So the more people that check out that book and post reviews, the more we can make that happen.
Sweet. Well, I hope this helps, and thank you for helping with all you do.
Likewise.